This is Football at 4.
You mean to tell me in 18 months he's gone from outplaying the best ever, or best going right now, to on that list? You mean to tell me that with an offensive line that is top 5 in pass protection, he's throwing the ball, holding the ball time-wise at 3.1 seconds and getting pressured 60% of the time? There's a massive regression.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, it is brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. That was Dan Orlovsky this morning on Get Up. Andrew DiCecco from the Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com is here for another edition of Football at 4, where he really talks about, Andrew, is the quarterback regressing? Is it the coaching? What do you look at as we hit the bye week of the first 4 weeks quarter poll? Jalen Hurts through 4 games so far.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here because I don't know that you can just necessarily pin everything on the head coach, just like you can't pin everything on the quarterback. The defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, obviously had his blemishes on Sunday, and Kellen Moore, to me, has sort of underwhelmed in delivering the offense that many expected. So I think it's more of a collective effort and things that need to get rectified going into the bye week. I think Kellen Moore could do a lot of things to help Jalen Hurts and put him in better position. Jalen obviously can't turn the football over as much as he has. You have to have more situational and spatial awareness when bodies are closing in on you in the pocket, and you have to have better decision-making in where to put the football in critical moments. And then defensively, you have to find a way to conjure a pass rush and basically get back to fundamentals. What happened to the tackling? So I think that it kind of all boils into the stew as to why the Eagles are where they are going into the bye week.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And he I don't know if you saw Dan's comments. He said, this is a poorly coached team. And then they went on, and he gave a lot of reasons why. I want to get your thoughts on it. You go back to the game in Tampa, and he said, look, you're shorthanded with no Brown, no Smith, and your 7 of your first 9 plays, you throw the football. Do you look back at that and say that is a coaching game plan problem?
Yeah, I do, especially when you go into that game looking at what the Buccaneers had defensively. They were a very porous run defense, and it just screamed. The game script just screamed, Mike, for the Eagles to hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley, try and grind out the clock, keep the Bucs offense on the sideline, and have a slow plodding, pursuit to victory, and not really have to do too much or ask too much of Jalen Hurts, given the circumstances, given the absence of 2 marquee players at receiver. I just thought that was a sound plan of attack. Now, obviously, the Eagles went in a different direction, and there wasn't much balance. And before you knew it, things started to snowball, and they really were ill-equipped to kind of recover.
Yeah, Andrew DiCecco is with us from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast. Obviously, it's not one thing. This isn't like one guy is the problem. There's a multitude of things when you're having problems like this. But I want to get your take on, does this all get fixed, or at least offensively, by just being healthy? If there's a healthy offense, are we having these kind of conversations?
Yeah, I think the offense, you said it, I think the offense just needs to get healthy, and simply that's why I believe that their shortcomings are easily correctable. When you have A.J. Brown, you have Devontae Smith back in there, you have Lane Johnson back at right tackle, the offense should look a lot better. Now, much can be made about the Eagles ranking just 19th in motion, and I've got a lot of questions about that over the past couple of days, and you could chalk that up to possibly just the limitations of the personnel at Jalen's disposal. Could be that Jalen isn't necessarily comfortable with sort of making that a permanent fixture in the offense, or it could just be Kellen sort of getting away from that a little bit for whatever reason. But I think that once you get all those pieces into place, the offense should be able to start humming, and you should be able to hit the ground running. But that's why I don't view that as the bigger issue, much like I do the defense. I think the defense is going to be a problem just given the certain issues that they're having, and they keep surfacing.
We'll get over there. I do want to ask a question regarding Hurts. And, look, this is he had Sirianni called plays, then it was Steichen, then it was Brian Johnson. Now they're on to Kellen Moore. Do you think there's, information overload on Jalen Hurts? And this is like a byproduct of just too many different philosophies and too many different voices in his head?
I absolutely do. I really do. When you have all these different voices and they're all different in their approach and how they coach things, you're taking some from this coach, some from that coach. You're trying to implement everything that Kellen's teaching you. Sometimes it could just be just a lot to take in a short period of time, and you're trying to do too much, you're pressing, whatever the case is. It's never a remedy or a good recipe for success, or should I say, that when you get all these different voices in your quarterback's ear, if you're trying to have long-term success, I just think that you have to settle in on one way, because you're having now a new quarterbacks coach, a new offensive coordinator, and they want you to see it and do things different ways. And the mechanics are going to be a little bit different. So I do think that that's part of the reason why Jalen is having some of the early season issues.
Andrew, one of the stats that they pointed out I thought was crazy. Combined sacks, interceptions, and fumbles for Jalen Hurts. They called them negative plays. He has 82 since the start of last year. Only two quarterbacks, Sam Howell and Bryce Young. Neither are starting quarterbacks anymore. In fact, Sam Howell, I don't even know, is he in Seattle?
I think he backs up, Geno Smith in Seattle.
All right, so they're the only two quarterbacks in the league who have more combined sacks, interceptions, and fumbles than Jalen. Jalen has 82, Hal has 91, and Bryce Young has 92. Those guys got benched. So when you hear those numbers and ask about Jalen Hurts and say, man, are those numbers accurate? Does that say that he is not the guy that we thought he was?
I don't know that that's – I think it's too early to make that determination through 4 weeks. It could just be a byproduct of Jalen not having A.J. or Devontae and trying to really acclimate to a new system and work through some of the growing pains. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say, going back to from last season until right now, it's 27 turnovers. He's had 3 in the red zone this year, totally inexcusable for a quarterback, and now in his 4th season as a full-time starter. So I'm certainly not absolving Jalen of any of his shortcomings. He needs to be able to rectify those certain issues if the Eagles are to go where the team is expecting to go this year. And for me, I just think that it could just be a byproduct of a quarterback pressing, trying to do too much. You see the hero ball tendencies kept surfacing in the early part of the season, and that's going to have to stop. And I have to think that when you look at all the issues the Eagles are having right now, we talk about the offense getting back on track. I think that's something that certainly can be correctable. But I also think the quarterback turnover issues can get corrected if you get in the room and Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier, the quarterback's coach, are seeing certain tendencies, certain situations down in distance that Jalen's more prone to turning the football over, and maybe you coach that out of him. But I think that those are certain issues that the Eagles can get cleaned up.
Yeah, I guess, on the coaching front, all the different voices, you wonder if you get to a point where you just start tuning people out because you heard too much. Hey, Steichen told me to do this. Now you're telling me to do this. And this guy told me to do that. At what point do you just say, I'm just going to do what I know?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I think it's a natural reaction. Equate it to your job, Mike. Let's say you had a new boss this year who's telling you to do things a different way. Let's say last year it was somebody else who's telling you to kind of approach your job in a different way. And you're trying, and they're all different, and you have all these different voices, and you're just like, you know what, eventually I'm just going to try and do what I know, what I've always done, and hopefully that's a remedy for success, because eventually it becomes information overload, and you don't really know which is the right way, how you should be doing it, and you're trying to mix and match, and I just think that ultimately that is not a long-term sustainable remedy for success.
All right, you mentioned the defense, and I guess the one question I think we all know the answer to, but I will ask you because you've been to training camp, you know a lot of these guys, you follow them through the draft and see this team up close and personal. Do you have any anticipation, Andrew, that they will find pass rush? Because if they can't find pass rush, this style of defense doesn't seem to work.
And I'm glad you said that, because in order for Vic Fangio or really any defensive coordinator, for them to have success in their system, you have to be able to manufacture some sort of a consistent pass rush. And right now the Eagles do not have players equipped to do so. And what I mean by that is you're looking at Bryce Huff, I'm looking at Nolan Smith Jr. Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham have proven that they can do that. But Josh Sweat is the same player who ran out of gas late in the season. Last year, he played 828 snaps. So you're asking a lot of him to step up into a more prominent role if you're not able to get anything out of Bryce Huff and Nolan Smith. And then Brandon Graham, as we all know, is 36 years old. He's playing out of his mind right now. But is that sustainable? How long can you continue to lean on a player who's in by all accounts, his last season in the NFL? I don't think that's a fair ask. You simply need your $51 million player in Bryce Huff to be able to step up. And for me, you're seeing tight ends be able to wash him out. He's not effective in the running game. He has just one tackle on the season, so he's not affecting any aspect of the game. You're not seeing the spurts. You're not seeing the pressures. Nolan Smith, who I went into the season with some optimism, and I told a lot of folks to exercise some patience when you're assessing his play. I haven't seen any signs of optimism for Nolan going into now 4 weeks now. You're not seeing the pressures. The same thing with Bryce Huff. You're seeing him get bullied and pushed around by tight ends. You saw Bijan Robinson put Nolan Smith on his backside. So I just don't know how effective you can be as a defense if you're not able to get pass rush from your premier players going into the season. So yeah. I don't know if that's going to be something that works itself out.
Well, you brought him up, Smith, because I was going to ask you. I know going back to the draft last year, talking about Nolan Smith, 30th pick. Why is he strong? Why are we seeing a guy who has essentially made no impact? And do you think that he will get it? Will it click for him? Or do you watch a guy that just is too small at this level now that you've gotten a bigger sample size?
Well, I don't know that we can say that him being too small is a reason for him not being able to make much of an impact, because off the top of my head, I could think of someone like a Dwight Freeney, who was one of the league's premier edge rushers, for his career. But for Nolan, for me, he added 7 pounds of muscle, but it comes down to his hand usage. He's not very effective using his hands to disengage from blocks. He's solely been able to get by on his athleticism, his ability to maneuver laterally, and he never has to really take on a block. He's not effective, I should say, taking on a block, and having to be able to deconstruct that and find a way to maneuver and get around the edge. So until he's able to get the reps and really get the confidence and have a plan as a pass rusher, because he doesn't seem to have much of a plan when his initial approach is sort of deconstructed there, then he won't be effective. And for a player like Nolan, he only played 16% of the snaps last year. So that right there is not enough of a sample size to make any determination one way or the other. But he's playing a lot more this year, and you're not seeing the production. You're not seeing the steady progression from him. And it could be a byproduct of a player having to play more and simply working through some of those challenges, Mike. But for me, I'm just not seeing the explosiveness that we saw when he was being highly touted coming out of the draft. So it's really concerning for both players, in Bryce Huff and Nolan Smith.
Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. In your mind, does Sid Brown's return give this defense anything different, or is he just going to be kind of a role bit player?
I think he's just going to be kind of a bit player in this defense. Now, it's important to note that Vic Fangio does not traditionally rotate a lot of his players, right? Primarily, you're saying Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean take on the lion's share of the snaps. Pretty much they played every snap at linebacker. There's not a ton of rotating going on. Sans injury in the secondary either. Now, I do expect a 3-safety look with Sidney Brown once he does get acclimated. And again, that's also going to take some time because he missed all of training camp. Mental reps are one thing, but getting into practice and getting the physical reps are something that I don't think you can replicate. So that's going to take a little bit of time, but I think he can also affect the game as a run defender. He's very physical. He's like a heat-seeking missile, so he can kind of add a spark in that way. But when you're looking at the personnel that Vic has to work with, and you're trying to leave no stone unturned, I have to think that they're going to try and find a way to work him in. But ultimately, I think he's just going to be more of an ancillary player, kind of a bit player.
Cooper DeJean, he got brought up by Vic Fangio. Does he step into that slot and change the complexion of this defense in your mind?
Yeah, I think that he's going to be somebody that the Eagles look to coming out of the bye, because eventually you have to get those startup costs out of the way. You drafted him in the second round. You put him out there. He adds infinitely more athleticism. His tackling prowess is far superior than Avonte Maddox. So I think you put him in, but knowingly you have to understand that there's going to be some issues that are going to be, thrown in his direction. Teams are going to look to test him. He might miss a tackle or two. There might be some mental lapses in coverage, but these are the startup costs that you have to get out of the way. And I ultimately think the benefit of having him back there is to work through and develop some communication with Quinyon Mitchell on the back end, because those are two players that are going to be prominent fixtures for that Eagles defense in the future. So I would put him back there, and I would almost expect him to be back there coming out of the bye.
I know you wrote an article, about Ben Van Sumeren and, his special teams prowess, Jeremiah Trotter. What do you look at the bye week, how these two linebackers have performed through 4 weeks, and do they need to consider possibly making a change at that position?
Well, if you listen to Michael Clay, he was gushing about Ben Van Sumer and gave him a really good endorsement. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. has performed better on special teams than I initially thought going into the season. But for Ben, he had a snap on offense as a fullback. He could play. He played wide receiver in high school. He runs a 4.4. He jumps a 42.5-inch vertical. This is a pure athlete. And I think if you're Vic Fangio, and maybe you're not overly enthralled with what you've gotten from, let's say, a Nakobe Dean, or maybe you want to work somebody else in that can kind of alleviate some of the pressure from a Zach Bond, you might want to put Ben out there because that kind of athleticism, his toughness and tenacity, and his ability to make tackles, he's an excellent tackler. And I think on a team devoid of consistent tacklers, that might be an avenue that you look to explore. But he certainly should be able to help you situationally in pass defense or even in short yardage where he's really effective attacking downhill. I think when you have the personnel that you have and you're Vic and you're searching for answers, you have to leave no stone unturned. And to me, I would start giving Ben some snaps, maybe 8 snaps here, 10 snaps there, and then Jeremiah Trotter as well, just to see what you have, because those two guys, when you look at Devin White on a 1-year deal, Zach Bond on a 1-year deal, the Jeremiah and Ben are going to be players that you're going to be looking to count on in the future, and I think you might want to get their feet wet earlier than later.
All right, let's come into the interior, which is supposed to be your strength. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis. Is it time for the Eagles to start considering maybe lessening Davis's role and giving someone else some of those snaps?
Well, my question to you would be, if you lessen Davis's role, who are you giving more snaps to? Because for me, I think Moro Ojomo has done some good things. Him and Jordan Davis actually shared the same amount of snaps in 37 apiece. Thomas Booker is a player who's done an exceptional job in the role that he's being asked to do. He plays a ton of effort, chases down plays down the field. You don't often see that from a down lineman. But you could certainly see more of a rotation, but I don't know that they have anyone equipped to be able to – like Moro Ojomo is more of a role player. Yeah. He really probably isn't best suited to be a starter. Thomas Booker, not a starter. Jordan Davis can be effective, but I think you might want to supplement that in with someone else to get more out of that position. But they do have a nice combination of tackles. For me, it comes down to consistency. You're not seeing the consistency game to game from Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. The game that Jalen Carter had against the Saints was about one of the better defensive performances I've seen from a defensive tackle. Just being a disruptive, he found a way to impact almost every play in that game. And if their Eagles are able to get that version of Jalen Carter every week, they're going to have a player who's primed for an all-pro season. But until you're able to get that consistency, and it all starts with them up front, they're the centerpieces, the defense ultimately is going to kind of go as they go.
Yeah, and, your question is fair. Like, where do you have, I don't know, Milton Williams? Can you get more pass rush from him from the interior? You're just trying to find ways to get pressure. But I guess, I don't know, are we coming to a point where we're saying Jordan Davis has been a disappointment? Or is he, I know his position, you don't look at stats, but are we saying, man, that guy has really become what we had hoped?
Yeah, I mean, relative to where he's drafted, he was picked 13th, and you're expecting – look, he was never taken for his pass rush acumen, but that was something that the Eagles, I'm sure, believe that they could tap into, maybe a 4 or 5 sack season, a season type of player. Mm-hmm. But he just hasn't delivered, Mike,
No.
Whether it be due to conditioning some years, whether it be just – I mean, what I noticed from him is when he plays high, when he gets a little bit high and tired, that's where linemen are able to kind of move him and get him sideways and throw him off balance. And that's where teams are able to find success.
Yeah.
So I think if you're able to find the right balance of snaps where he can kind of work in tandem with whether it be Milton Williams, Moro Ojomo, what have you, he should be able to be effective. But the Eagles drafted this player to be a premier player on their defense. He said all the right things at the podium during training camp. He was very well aware that the responsibility falls on both the shoulders of himself and Jalen Carter to really take the baton left by Fletcher Cox and move this defense forward. And he has not done that. So I think it's fair to look at that as a disappointing draft pick.
Yeah, well, and listen, I'm not asking to be Vita Vea there, but you see a guy with that size, he doesn't have to. It's just don't push him out of the way. I mean, that guy literally on 2 goal line plays, which I guess you can question why the heck are you running at 50 to the right side there. He blows up 2 plays. This Eagles team, it's not like you have a guy that's just clogging up running lanes there. That's where I think, forget the pass rushing aspect of it. This isn't a dominant run team. And you have a guy that you drafted to be a dominant run stuffer, and that's not happening.
Right, and if nothing else, you're expecting him to be a space eater, kind of like he was against the Saints, where you're able to take on double teams, and then you're able to clean things up for your linebackers and secondary players to come down and make plays on ball carriers. But they just haven't. Jordan Davis has not been consistent enough week to week for you to be able to be solely reliant on him being that player that he was against the Saints. But the problem that the Eagles have, Mike, is that they don't have any depth there at defensive tackle. So if you take him off the field, who are you replacing him with?
Well,
so
and that's why I asked.
Stuck right now.
That's why I asked you a question like that, because I know you know the depth of this team and could say, "Hey, look, I think Thomas Booker should get more snaps." Or
I do think Thomas Booker deserves more snaps. Now, he played 24 last week. I'm not suggesting he should be a starter, but you're seeing a lot more effort from him. That's what really jumps off the tape when you watch him play.
Yeah.
He gets straight ahead. He's good with bull rushes, but he's also really good at pursuing ball carriers down the field. Like I said, you don't often see that from down linemen. So I do think that he warrants more snaps, and I should suggest Moro Ojomo warrants more snaps as well to kind of supplement what you're not getting from Jordan Davis.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, good stuff. We could talk about the issues on this team, but hopefully you got Cleveland, you got the Giants, you got Cincinnati, you got Jacksonville, you got Dallas. You got 5 teams that are also having similar conversations to what we're having right now with the issues with their teams, and hopefully they are 5 get-right games as you hit the back end of that schedule. We'll be doing it here on Football at 4. That's my man Andrew DiCecco right there. Check him out on the Inside the Birds podcast and, of course, at InsideTheBirds.com. All right, brother, we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Have a good one.